So moving on to our main event, our guest speaker tonight is Jesse Merrin from CSW, in regards to the Point Richmond Connectivity Project. Jesse?
Thank you, Eric, and thank you everyone for allowing us to be here this evening. Before we get started, I want to open the floor for Gail Payne from the City of Richmond, who's here with me tonight. She is the city's newest senior transportation planner, and is the city's PM on the project.
Thank you, Jesse. My apologies because I'm having video problems. And so I am a human. Jesse can vouch for me.
Yes, I
And
can.
yeah, and I just want to say how grateful I am. I'm a new employee at the City of Richmond, and this is one of my first projects. So I feel very fortunate. And this is a great project trying to improve bicycling and walking in downtown Point Richmond. And it's just beginning. So it's great timing arriving here in Richmond and working with CSW, both Jesse and as well as I think Robert Stevens, that's you here. And CSW has been working a long time in Richmond. Their office is actually on Railroad Avenue. So it just is, it's a great fit and we look forward to it. And Jesse, I pass it to you.
All right, thank you. As Gail mentioned, CSW, ST2 is technically our full name. Our office is located in Point Richmond. We used to be on the Triangle side, but we are now in the little house that's on Railroad Avenue. You may have seen our sign on the porch there. So we're pretty familiar with Point Richmond. I actually um, lived and worked in Point Richmond for several decades ago, and so I'm kind of a returning person to the community. And I am probably familiar to all of you from your January meeting, when I was here to do a very brief pre-introduction for this project. And we talked a little bit about what the outreach plan would be. So we're back here tonight with kind of that kicking off that first touch point for the project. So I'll kind of reintroduce what the project is doing, and then we'll open it up and hopefully have some conversation around kind of existing conditions, understandings, and opportunities. So I'm going to go ahead and start by sharing my screen, and not the screen with all your faces on it, but the screen with the presentation. So I have about 10 slides to get through that are really about the project, kind of setting the stage, and then we'll shift into, I hope, a lot of discussion and comments. And when we get into that section, Gail and I will be taking notes to make sure that we're documenting your comments. You know, in an in-person meeting, you can see us writing those down, but I want to make sure that you know that we are taking notes as we go. So the Downtown Point Richmond Connectivity Project is really looking at the city as a whole. Let's see how I make sure I'm moving forward. And it's looking at closing this kind of key gap in the citywide bicycle network and the regional Bay Trail system, but also improving bicycle and pedestrian safety and access within downtown Point Richmond as a part of that project. So it is not the same as some of the other projects that you may have been hearing about. Eric mentioned at the beginning that next month you'll be hearing from the project team conducting the cut-through traffic reduction study. And this is also not the same as some of the improvements that are happening to the protected bikeways, the two-way protected bikeways on Cutting Boulevard. So these are all projects that are looking at Bike and Downtown Point Richmond and are happening at this time, but they are distinct projects. So we'll try to be very clear about what's in the scope for each project. And I also want to let you know and assure you that the project teams are coordinating with each other kind of behind the scenes to make sure that we're supporting each other, and that we're kind of not double doing things. But we also know that we want to make sure that you can speak to us about any of your concerns and we'll pass those along. So the purpose of this project, as we mentioned, is to really look at kind of that link between the intersection of Girard and Richmond and the intersection of Tewksbury and Santa Fe. And how do we kind of close that gap in the bike routes that come up to those points, but then don't kind of continue through that gap. And through that process of connecting those bikeways, we want to make sure that we're thinking about pedestrian safety, we're thinking about what's happening at those bus stops, and that we're doing so in a way that engages the neighborhood, the city as a whole, businesses, community organizations to help shape those improvements. When I came to you last time, we had a little bit less funding. This project now has 1.9 million in funding for both design and construction. And that's as a result of a grant that the federal grant that the city won from the HUD Housing Incentive Pool program. That does create a sort of a federal contribution to the project, but it does also mean that contrary to what I told you at the January meeting, we do have a little bit of funding for construction. So that's something that's changed since we spoke with you last. It's also funded through the Metropolitan Transportation Commission, with matching funds from the West Contra Costa Transportation Commission. So it's a mix of funding sources. But it is a project that's administered and obviously managed by the City of Richmond. As Gail mentioned, we are just beginning in earnest the community engagement and the design portion of this project. We're coming to you. Your kind of our first meeting is in this first milestone where we're looking for community perspectives on those existing conditions. What are your issues and your concerns? We are meeting with community organizations. We have an online survey that's just launched today. And at the end of the presentation, I'll have a QR code and a link to that online survey. It's also on the project website. We'll have a workshop, in-person workshop coming up on May 23rd, and a walking tour on May 30th. And we have information about the date, time, and location of those at the end of our presentation and on the project website. So with all of the feedback that we hear through these different methods in this first engagement milestone, the team will kind of go up and develop some options. How can we close this gap, improve pedestrian safety, considering the budget that we have and all of the existing conditions and concerns that are out there? And we'll come back to you at the second touch point and share some options. And at that point, we'll want to hear your feedback on those options. What do you think works well? What do you think doesn't work well? What did we miss? And then we can take that feedback and come back to you at the third point with design, with a preferred concept, and get your feedback on design refinements at that point. And at each of those 1, 2, 3 points, we'll have an online survey, we'll have an in-person workshop, and we'll have a walking tour where we can go, because we have a relatively small project area, we can go out and look at some places, talk about specific points. And then following that design process, we move into final design, bidding, and construction in 2027, 2028. So that's a little bit of kind of the process that we anticipate taking for this project. So where does this project come from? It really comes out of, as with any public works project, it comes out of the adopted city plans. So it reflects the ADA transition plan, it reflects the bicycle and pedestrian action plan, of course, the general plan, which is your big overall plan that sets the vision for the community. And it also comes out of the ferry to bridge to greenway plan, which is a long tongue twister and has no good short version. So I just try to say the whole thing each time. That plan was developed in 2021. So it's been a few years since that was created. But it did look at this particular gap that our project is addressing. It looked at some potential ways to bridge that gap. As you can see on the left, identifying again those two intersections or endpoints. And it looked at sort of some interim ways to close that gap and some longer term ways to close that gap. And on the next slide, I saw some people leaning in. We zoom in on that map just a little bit because we want to talk a bit about what that plan assumed, and maybe a little bit about what's changed since then. So that plan talked about potentially closing this gap with sharrows or share the road signs on Washington and Park Place. And it talked about a longer term vision for a mixed use, what's called a class 1 multi-use trail along the east side of Railroad Avenue. That plan assumed that multi-use trail could go on an easement on the BNSF property that's along the east side of Railroad Avenue. And these same ideas are also reflected in the bicycle and pedestrian action plan. But what we know now, kind of in current time, is that um, BNSF is not currently BNSF is not currently a willing partner in either selling property or providing an easement for that kind of a multi-use trail. So our project will need to look at um, other ways of approaching the closure of that gap. It might be the same route, it might be a different type of facility, but that's part of why we're coming out to the community, is to kind of understand what some perspectives are and thoughts are on that approach. As we talked about in January, there were also design plans that went along with that Ferry to Bridge to Greenway plan effort. Those plans were completed in 2020, which is in the early days of COVID. They were also completed prior to the installation of the two-way protected bikeway on Cutting Boulevard. The protected bikeway that came down along Girard had just been installed at that time. And so some conditions have changed since then, and that's why this project really needs to take a fresh look at what we know now and what our conditions are now, what the community's perspectives are, how folks are riding, how folks are using these streets. So that is a little bit of background on the project. And now, as I said, we're really coming to you to say, given that this project has an opportunity to close this bikeway gap, to think about improving pedestrian safety, comfort along that route, and ways of thinking about improving the experience of taking the bus. What do you know from your experience being Point Richmond folks that we should know about existing conditions out there? So what we're going to do over the next slides is I'm wanting to kind of guide our conversation as we talk about sort of specific areas in Point Richmond. So Point Richmond downtown's kind of a square. So we're going to look at first talk about the area up towards the north where that protected bikeway comes in at Tewksbury and Santa Fe. And we're going to kind of work our way across town until we end up looking at the area around Mechanics Bank and the Girard and Cutting intersection. So I'm hoping that we can just take each section in part. We will share a little bit on the right of each map what we've heard to date, what we heard from you in January, what we've heard in other conversations, what's been brought forward from other projects. That's just to let you know that we have heard about some concerns, but we're really here to continue to talk to you about that and hear what we might have missed from this list on the right. By no means an exhaustive list. So I want to begin by opening it up to talk about the area that's shown on the map here. Tewksbury and Santa Fe is up on the left. Tewksbury comes along, it hits Railroad and starts to come down, and we can see the beginning of Washington Avenue here as well. So the question we'd like to ask you is, what should we know about the ways that people walk, the way they bike, the way they take the bus, and where there are opportunities for improvement or routes that you would like to see considered? So I see a first item pop up in the chat.
Would you just before we jump into the Q&A,
Yeah.
I know there's various classes of bike lanes. Would you
Mm-hmm.
mind just briefly kind of walking through what those are? Because I know some
Yeah.
are simply just paint on the ground, others are complete segregation from like vehicular traffic. I think that's kind of
Right.
and we see those around town and other areas we travel. Would you mind touching on that?
I'd be happy to touch on that. I will also ask for support from Gail because I don't always get the numbers right because they don't
Yeah.
follow what's logical for me.
Uh-huh. So, this is a great graphic to start out that discussion is that
Mhm.
um right by Santa Fe, the class 4 cycle track, two-way cycle track is where that ends there. And that's the more protected kind of bikeway that's on the south side of Tewksbury. And so there's different ways of calling it a two-way bikeway, class 4 or a cycle track. And the reason why this is important is it creates a separate space for people to bike and a separate space for people to drive. So then they just separate and can go at the same time and not have to share the space. And then east of there is, you see those green markings, and those are called sharrows, and that's a class 3 bike route. And so that's where people driving and people bicycling have to share a space. And that, because of speed differentiations and wanting to go in the same place, that does create problems. And so that's tends to happen when there's a constrained space. And so those are the two that are showing up here.
So then the other kind that you may be familiar with from other contexts is when we have on-street striped bike lanes. So there's no vertical element like a bollard or a curb or a little bump that separates the bike lane from the travel lane. But there is a designated space within the roadway for the bicyclist to travel. And then another type that I alluded to at the beginning, it's called a class 1 multi-use trail, which was what was identified in some of the other planning elements. And I see the hands coming up. Class 1 multi-use trail is sort of completely separated. It's not really a part of the roadway system. So you might think of any kind of a trail system that both bikes and people walking use that's separate from a roadway, right? Is
Like
a
Richmond
class 1.
Greenway.
Yeah.
Like Richmond Greenway. Great
Yeah.
example. Yeah.
Yeah, and I
So
don't want to take up all the time here. I see a lot of hands coming up. I think that sorry, the last follow-on question to that was, what is safety what drives the class primarily, or is it a combination of safety and budget? Because we know certain areas downtown, there's kind of some natural traffic calming
mhm.
in general. So, if you go into Oakland or other areas, around the Bay Area where you have significant traffic at high speeds, obviously the segregation makes sense. In some areas
Uh-huh.
where traffic is naturally calm, paint on the ground, gets the job done as well. I don't want to trump any more time, but I just kind of curious what drives that decision making as far as
I,
class decision.
yeah, so there is some guidance around speed and volume in relation to different classes of bikeways. Um, on a project by project basis, it may have to do with those elements. It may also have to do with kind of the ages, in all ages, all comfort type of facility can be appropriate in places where you have a lot of younger riders. So you want to provide more protection. It may also have something to do with budget or the planning documents for a given community. So it is a little bit nuanced, although there is guidance out there around the elements you're speaking to.
Okay, appreciate that. So,
Yeah.
okay to start taking some questions here,
Yes, please.
other than mine. Graham, I see your hand up.
Yes. Uh, 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 Thank you, Eric. Look, my question relates to up there on Tewkesbury and Castro, where you have the bicycle walking path coming off the bridge, comes down, crosses over Tewkesbury, and then diagonally crosses over Tewkesbury again, and goes on into the village. I drive when I come into the village. I drive down Tewkesbury, which is quite a steep hill, and on several occasions, and it has a stop sign there. I absolutely agree. On several occasions, I've come down that hill, and a bicycle has shot out of that bikeway there, and in several occasions has very nearly been skittled by a car which had stopped at the stop sign and was then just accelerating across the intersection when this bike just came down the pathway and ran right across in front of it. I think that's an accident waiting to happen. And I was wondering, as part of your uh, planning, of your traffic planning, whether it would be an idea to put some sort of double gateway thing where one gateway goes 3/4 of the way across that path, and the other on the other side it goes across 3/4 of the way across the path. So the guy on a bike would have to get off the bike, walk around those two things, and then get back get back onto his bike to go into the pathway. That would stop them coming hurtling down that hill and then getting creamed by a car. And I just think that that's something that really needs to be carefully considered.
So Graham, thank you for that comment. One of the things that I want to uh, sort of maybe we think about today is that we're very early in the project. So for us we won't be necessarily be able to reply about specific design responses, like you have
Yeah,
proposed a solution. Um, so so please keep that coming. And also we're not quite at that point in the project, but so it is really helpful for us to hear about where there are issues. So I want to make sure that I'm understanding where you're speaking about. So I backed up one slide on the map. So this blue dot is right at Tewksbury and Santa Fe. You can see
that
the
is correct.
image in the upper right. Are you
Yes,
talking about further back to the left
yes,
on this map?
where the pathway comes off the bridge and
Okay.
comes down parallel to 580, and then it crosses over Tewkesbury to go over to the hamburger place there.
Okay.
And there's you've got the traffic lights from Castro coming across, and coming up and down Tewkesbury, you have stop signs. Now you're coming down the hill, which would be from the western side, down to
hmm
the junction there, and you can't really see the pathway coming in until you're right on top of it. And if somebody is speeding down that pathway, which they do on their bikes, you're not going to have time to stop them, even if you have already stopped at the stop sign and you're going across, because these guys will just hurtle straight across. And
Great.
I've seen that
Thank you.
on several occasions.
Okay. Thank you, Graham. And I see that James in the chat also seconded that comment. I,
Thank you, James.
yeah. Eric, do you want to call folks?
Sure. I think Bruce's
Okay.
hand was up next. Bruce?
Yes, well, first, it's important to remember this is part of the San Francisco Bay Trail. So it's not just for bicyclists, this is for pedestrians as well. And in that vein, as far as existing conditions go, the situation is very bad for pedestrians on Tewksbury as you go east toward Washington, across from the spot. The bus stop there
hmm
needs to be improved. It's terrible. The sidewalk's like 2 feet, maybe 2.5 feet wide. There's utility poles. There's all kinds of cables. It's a bad situation. So that really needs to be widened for pedestrians. And the fence there on the private property is partly on city property. So there's more room to play with there than you might think of looking at the site. Um, with regard to what type of trail, whether it's class 1, 2, or 3, I think the dominant consideration here is the width you have to play with. There's not room for a class 1, 2-way multi-use trail. So you've got to do your best, I think, to work with the sidewalk for pedestrians, improving that, making it safer, and to make to protect the bikeway to the best you can, given the space available. So those are my thoughts on this particular area. Thank you.
Thanks, Bruce. I just wanted to follow up on one thing you said. If you can see the image on the screen, when you said that that fence is, I think you said was not on private property, are you
It,
referring to the fence behind the bench here shown in this image or a different fence?
I don't recognize that image. No, I'm talking about Tewksbury across the street from the spot going toward Johnny Boy's.
Okay.
The bus stop on the south side of Tewksbury.
Okay, you may not recognize this image because it's taken from the freeway side, but in that image is the bench right there. So that is the spot. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
probably one of the worst bus stops in the city of Richmond, if not the Bay Area.
Great. Thank you.
All right. I think Gary, your hand was up next.
Can you hear me okay?
Oh, yeah.
So this is a question. It's before my time, but I know you made the comment earlier around BNSF and not being very collaborative about giving up any space over there. I know a long time ago, but again, before my time, maybe somebody else can chime in here. is there was negotiations to actually stop train horns in various places throughout Point Richmond that was successful. And I don't know who that was negotiated with, but is there any thoughts about however that was done? Is there some room there if we know the connections with NSF and BNSF? Is that possible?
So, thinking about train horns and quiet zones in relation to BNSF would be outside of the scope of this project. That's a kind of a coordination that we wouldn't necessarily be able to do as a part of this particular project. But maybe someone else in the community knows a little bit more about what was done in the past.
Yeah, that wasn't really my question, but I wasn't trying to assume this project is going to solve the question around train horns. I'm just saying when that was done, somehow that was successfully negotiated. And the question was, I don't know who did that. This, like I said, before I came here, but
Hmm.
is there anything within that would help actually get them to move any? I don't know how far up you've gone on BNSF. A lot of these things have to do with how high did you get in the organization. So if somebody else knows something more about that, it's not me.
Okay,
We're
thank you. We
we're
can.
meeting with BNSF on or we're meeting on potentially looking at quiet zones within Richmond, and so we may be meeting with BNSF on that citywide. So we'll take that under consideration. And it's a good point, is that we may have be in contact with them.
Well,
And yeah,
Yeah, a lot of
on
it has
B,
to do with who you're talking to. So yeah, no,
yeah,
it's a
that's a good
possibility.
point.
That's all. Thanks.
I can
Thank you,
offer
Gary.
something. I can offer something on BNSF. This is Bruce.
Bruce, okay.
Yeah, a number of years ago, try to get some traction in the city to negotiate with BNSF to acquire a piece of their land along along.
How was it? I'm still on it.
Okay, a piece of their land between Richmond Avenue and Tewksbury, uh, east of the parking area, perpendicular parking area on Railroad Avenue. So to create a protected bikeway east of the perpendicular parking, so the bicyclists could get off the street, out of downtown Point Richmond, off of Railroad Avenue, and have a safe area all to themselves between Richmond Avenue and Tewksbury. So if you're speaking with BNSF, that would be a subject to bring up. We did do some geometrics and things, and there's space there. I don't remember the exact width we were talking about, but there was space to create a protected bikeway completely separated from the road, giving a distance from the railroad tracks that's equivalent to that between the tracks and the apartment buildings on the western side by Roma Cafe. So I have background on that, Jesse, if that'd be helpful.
Bruce, that would be helpful. I'd like to talk to you about that further. Thank you.
Okay,
Yeah.
Peter, I think your hand was up next.
Yeah, I put it down because this is probably too preliminary for this, but I was just talking to Sue about my wife about the fact that uh, a lot of the issues are just the fact that bicyclists don't. And I ride a recumbent trike. I have several recumbent trikes. I love them. As a recumbent trike rider, I have to obey all traffic laws because I'm low, that kind of, I need to be seen. And I see bicyclists on even on the Bay Trail, they'll just whip between people. Occasionally, some of them will ring it, use a bell or something. So I
Mhm.
think maybe again, I know it's preliminary, but a lot of signage trying to address the fact that we need the bicyclist to act more responsibly. I think if they did that, a lot of these other things wouldn't be as big an issue because
Okay.
Point Richmond is a very nice destination to bike around. I really
Mhm.
appreciate that. You just have to be able to control the traffic better. And by traffic, I mean the bicyclists, just as Graham and James was saying, just get them to obey the laws, whether that's little bicycle type speed bumps or bicycle sized stop signs or yield signs that are right there for them to see.
Mm-hmm.
There's just too many bad actors. So that's it.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
Appreciate that. Jesse West, I think you're up next.
Am I unmuted? I'm sorry, I haven't
Yes,
done
you
this for.
are.
Okay, great. Okay, I may be speaking too soon. I know you're moving through town, but I see that that yellow line is on my block of West Richmond. And so I just want to say that whatever is done, it's hugely important that we get bicycles, dangerous bicycles, off the sidewalks around the triangle. They also go behind the bank. You're going to talk about that later. It's a
Mm-hmm.
little easier to avoid them. But a lot of us live or work downtown where we're on West Richmond, the 100 block. We're stepping out of doors right onto the sidewalk. Bruce Baird and Bruce and Brubeck tried to help me with this several years ago. There was some money for it. Bruce can speak to that. And there were for signage, and it just maybe I'm the one who dropped the ball, but it never really happened. And um, it's just that bike riding. I just saw it a couple days ago again. Um, it's yeah, that's all I have to say is we have to get bicycles off the sidewalks. It's against the law. People don't know that. Any signage has to be really obvious, like a bicycle with a big line through it where they actually notice it. So that's one of my concerns.
Thank
Thanks,
you, Jesse.
Jesse.
Can you talk a little bit more about where in particular
Yeah, the
the
100,
hotspots?
my biggest concern is the 100 block of West Richmond. That's where I live, and that's where I, for years, have been jumping out of the way of bicycles on the sidewalk.
Okay.
I
Thank you.
honestly, I walk around Point Richmond. I don't see bicycles on the sidewalk as much on Parkway or that side of the triangle that Washington runs
Mm-hmm.
along. I don't, maybe somebody else does. I my I see them a lot, adults and children, solo adults, um, families with kids, teenagers, everybody riding their bikes on the 100 block of West Richmond. And like I said, I think everybody knows the bikes cut behind the bank on that
Mm-hmm.
sidewalk, but you're going to speak to that later. And I don't feel my life is in danger when they do that. So I'm not,
Yeah.
as worried about that. So that's my comment.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, Edie.
I have a question about the northern side of Tewksbury because that's what we're dealing with right now is Tewksbury. Um, the north side of it, I know that along west, in fact, go back one slide. You will better see it there. I know that the I guess that would be the eastern side of Richmond is BNSF. Is the northern side of Tewksbury under the purview of Caltrans, or where is that? Because Tewksbury, one of the issues with Tewksbury is it was a very narrow street to start off with, and you're constrained by space. And even
Mm-hmm.
Bruce brought that up. Is there a way to have some kind of negotiations to widen Tewksbury so that it would allow for both a more protected bicycle path and even, dare I say, a sidewalk on the northern side of Tewksbury that would allow pedestrian access?
Mm-hmm. I see James's note that Caltrans owns the northerly intersection of Railroad and Tewksbury, and our surveyors are out this week doing a bit of research to try to pin down some of these ownership and jurisdiction questions. So I don't have the explicit answer for you, Edie, right now, but that is something that we're trying to get a little bit more clarity around.
Okay, Gary, and then we've got to move on.
Yeah, last question. Jesse just keyed up something for me because I do a lot of work out by the plunge on the tennis courts and stuff there, and this is probably outside of scope with this. We have that big problem with bicyclists coming through the tunnel and down down along, and they're on the sidewalk, and so I assume that's really outside of scope of this, but it's something that is an ongoing problem for us.
Okay. And we'll
Is
look
that
at that a
outside the
little.
scope of this, Jesse?
I think let's talk about that a little bit more when we get to that part of the map, and we can identify specifically where you're talking
Okay.
about.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah. All right.
All right, Jesse, we've got about 15 or 20 minutes left, so we kind of need to move here. Sorry, a lot of good
No,
questions,
that's okay.
a lot of good
So I'm going to
conversation.
flip through these slides. So we have talked a little bit about kind of the central portion, and I keep going out of the view, so cutting off some of the comments. So quickly, some of the comments we have heard are about walking across the top of the triangle from the Park Place side to the Washington Avenue side. We've heard that Mariposa, the coffee shop's a strong destination, so there's on weekends maybe a lot of bike traffic there. We've heard that Railroad Avenue can sometimes feel unsafe for folks at night from a security standpoint. We've heard that the parallel parking on Railroad Avenue can fill up during lunch and special events. We've heard about the sidewalk condition along Railroad Avenue, and we've heard some comments that it feels like the parking lots on the downtown side of Railroad Avenue are underutilized. And we've also heard tonight about bikes on the sidewalk along Richmond Avenue. Uh, Other thoughts on this sort of central downtown area that we haven't already covered? If not, I'm going to move on to the next map because I think we may have more to say here. So we're going to see some slides here associated with that map. If anything comes to mind for folks as I'm flipping through, feel free to raise your hand. And then we get to what I'm thinking of as sort of the south side of downtown Point Richmond. So more of West Richmond Avenue, the rail crossing there at the bottom of Railroad Avenue, the Mechanics Bank Plaza, and the way in which Sharrows kind of shift into on-street bike lanes and then connect to the protected bikeways on Upper Girard and West Cutting. We do have bus stops around that Girard and Cutting Boulevard intersection. And we know that as a part of this project, we will have to deal with bringing that rail crossing where the BNSF crossing happens here of Richmond Avenue into compliance. We've heard concerns about how bike improvements could affect walking and parking in front of Mechanics Bank. We've heard folks say that this crossing from the bulb out at the plunge over towards Mechanics Bank does not feel safe and maybe could use some modifications for sightline visibility there. And we've heard concerns from bicyclists about the visibility crossing cutting along Girard. So what else haven't we heard or should we know?
Hey, Jesse, it's Gary. If you go back
Uh-huh.
at the bottom of your screen, you see the plunge on the left, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the street that's coming down there, that's people coming out of the tunnel or coming up there and down into the center of town. That's the place I've talked about, that's the sidewalk. And the problem there is we have bikes coming out of the tunnel going very fast coming down that sidewalk. And they've
Mm-hmm.
missed me a few times. They'd say holler, but it's part of the issue of the sidewalk versus the bike lane.
Okay. One thing I will offer that is a part of a separate project that looks at some kind of spot improvements to some of the existing bike infrastructure. I believe there is an intention to indicate a stripe because that is a multi-use path, that wide
Yep.
sidewalk, to help clarify that there are two ways there, that there are people walking there. And so that is a step toward addressing awareness that there are different kinds of modes using that way.
I
So,
think an idea of putting it down the middle would really help. Yep.
okay,
Okay.
great.
And maybe a few rumble strips to slow down the bikes coming out of the tunnel.
Okay. Um, since folks aren't sort of jumping in with new comments, I just want to ask, do you have any reactions or responses, support, or other opinions on the comments that are listed on the right side of the screen? Do you tend to agree, tend to disagree?
Well, I think just kind of I guess another general question. When we first started this conversation back in January, or this initial presentation, there was a design charrette that was shared. Is that still, is that going to be one of the alternatives, or is that kind of like pulled back and you're going to reapproach all of this with a few design alternatives going forward?
If I'm understanding your question correctly, we haven't gotten to that stage yet.
Okay.
So right now, so May 23rd and May 30th, we'll kind
Hmm.
of do the same presentation again in person and on foot through
Yeah.
the community. Um, Based on that, we'll develop some options, and then
Okay.
we'll come back to you again and say, what do you think about these? You'll help us find the
Yeah.
fatal flaws in those. So,
Yeah, and I think just generally one of the conundrums here, I mean, there's always challenges with everything on how you approach and implement these. I think, the design charrette that was shared eliminated uh, a, a percentage of the parking in the downtown area, and I know that was
mhm,
of concern.
mhm,
Um, I think the goal of this is to get folks out of the car and to use bikes and get on feet more. I think it's no secret that, in Point Richmond there is an aging population who just can't do that. And
mhm,
so I think, that was just kind of a shocker to a lot of the folks when you initially, or when the city and this kind of that first design charrette was shared. I think one of the ongoing issues is, car queues and the impacts if there is a lane diet here and things are constricted more, kind of what happens with the geometry of the car queues when trains are in the crossings. I
mhm,
think one of the concern, and what's, I think we all know what's kind of unique about Point Richmond is, on a Monday night, a lot of areas with parking, it's kind of a ghost town. On Thursday,
mhm.
Friday, Saturday, Sunday, we just surge,
Yeah.
with a lot of cars, that parking is full. If there is parking taken away with folks who can't walk or use the bike, or folks coming into town, will that push traffic or parking rather further, into the areas with more dense housing? Um, I think you've heard these concerns before, that came
Uh-huh.
up earlier in this conversation. So I think that the point of my comment is we look forward to seeing those design alternatives,
Uh-huh.
and kind of seeing, a couple different approaches about how to implement the solution.
Mhm. But just so I don't forget this point as we move through this conversation, as I get to the last slide, I want to invite everyone who's been on this call today to go take the online survey, and to come to all of those events because there are different ways to share your ideas. In the survey, there's a question about where do you usually park so that we can begin to understand kind of how residents and how visitors use the available parking.
Mhm.
And so that is a question that we want more information about.
Yeah. And
You mentioned that this is really about getting people out of their cars and onto bikes. There's this idea called complete streets, and it thinks about the public right of way, that space that's not privately owned, um, and trying to shape that space to be accessible and safe for all of the modes so that regardless of where anyone is in their economic path, in their sort of health path or their age, that they have a way, an equitable way to move through the community. So it's not so much of like, you shouldn't drive. It's more, how do we make it possible for people to move through the community as best they can? So, and there is also limited space. So we have to have those conversations about the trade-offs that happen and how can we, kind of make that work. So please keep those comments coming. Yeah.
all right, I see a hand up, Edie.
So I'm looking at this and I'm wondering what parts of the bike lanes are in stone, so to speak. Because I know that you do have many moving parts, different plans all happening at the same time, hopefully working together. But there were, as Eric mentioned, discussions of possibly making those bike lanes instead of being on South Girard, putting them onto Wine Street, putting them onto East Richmond Avenue. I guess I just kind of want to know what things are unmovable, unchangeable, not going to alter based on what you already have versus the things that we are actually able to change or able to put input on that actually could be changed.
Well, I will start by saying that we do have a specific budget for this project, and it is a limited budget. And so a part of the project will be an exercise in priority. Like, how do we make that money do the most and the best? So that's also a part of the conversation that we haven't really explicitly talked about today. Within the project boundaries, I don't know that anything is set in stone. I mean, there is a limit on what can be funded. There's sort of a limit on what can be tolerated. It seems unlikely that those bikeways that are sort of at the edges, like up Girard and out West Cutting, and Tewksbury, west of Santa Fe, I think it's unlikely that those will be changed as a part of this project. But really, we're here to hear from you and understand between those points, how can we best serve all of the communities and all of the modes and the users? So, we can't promise the sky, but we also really want to hear all of the ideas that you have. So I hope that's a good enough answer for that question. Yeah.
I'm curious back on the parking. Is there a place within downtown Point Richmond that you're having trouble parking and at specific times?
Well, I think the point I was there was a preliminary design, I'll call it a preliminary design concept that was shared, I think for discussion purposes only back in January. And kind of on the screen here in front of Mechanics Bank, it changed the geometry from angled to parallel, and the same thing on Girard. And so by way of doing that, it eliminated, and also in front of the plunge, it eliminated a certain percentage of that parking. That design also showed on Railroad, I think the same thing, changing it from, kind of perpendicular to parallel. And not that that's necessarily a bad thing on a Monday night, but Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, when folks come into town, there's a lot of times it's hard to find parking downtown already. And
So I
so I
just want
think,
to,
sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to clarify, are these the drawings that you were speaking of that change the parking?
Yeah, there
So
was.
yeah, so I just want to say, to reiterate, these particular plans were in the presentation in January.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
they are the plans that were developed in 2021 as a part of that Ferry to Bridge to Greenway plan. So again, we are really at the beginning of this process, and we really want to take a fresh look.
I
Um,
believe
yeah.
the plan that Eric's referring to, is the one that is on the right-hand side, third one down, where it's showing parallel parking
Hmm.
along Girard as opposed to diagonal parking. And same thing with East Richmond or West Richmond.
Okay. All right, cool. Thank you. I just wanted to make sure
Yeah.
that we all, we're on the same page there. Okay.
And when that was done, the neighborhood was not consulted about that beforehand. We sort of found out about it as it was a fait accompli. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We understand that. And that is a part of what has driven the outreach strategy for this project, is to make sure that we're very, clear about what the project can and can't do, and that we are speaking with you at every point along the way. And we're getting this kind of broad and documentable input into the project, so that the design that comes out of this project is a reflection of the community's perspectives, and the realities of what's out there, and design and engineering guidance, and the funding that we have as well.
Yeah. All right. I see one more hand up. Jesse West. Jesse, you're on mute.
Thank you. I had trouble getting to the unmute from watching that screen. I just want to add that a lot of people, you talk about streets being accessible for everybody, blah, blah. I get that. That's great. Okay. But I don't want it to get lost in this discussion about parallel parking versus angle parking. It's not just a matter of spaces, it's a matter of accommodating the people who come to the plunge often several times a week with walkers and with wheelchairs and with attendants and take classes, go in there and use the chair that lowers them into the pool, use the walking lane. Even if they're able-bodied, often they take really important exercise classes that keep them healthy. So I don't want it to become impossible for those people to use the plunge because they can't find parking. And that's, to me, a really important reason not to take away more parking. So that's it.
Thank you for that perspective. Yeah. Thank you. I just want to make sure it's noted that we're capturing the comments that are also in the chat. And I also recommend that we have a limited time with you. The slide that is on the screen at the moment has QR codes that you can scan at the moment. It also has links to the project website and has the date, time, and location of upcoming events. I would like to invite folks to visit the project website, which I'm hoping that we can share this presentation with you and have this disseminated to your membership. I know that Philip has got a lot of this information into your next print newsletter, but that may or may not be able to hit folks' mailboxes before May 23rd, May 30th. So we would like to invite you to get the word out to your neighbors and your friends in the Point and in Richmond before then, so that folks can participate.
Great. Well, we really appreciate you taking the time to give this presentation and answering our questions and also fielding our comments and concerns. Before we let you go here, kind of last call, any other questions or comments before we move on? I don't see any hands. I'll do one last scroll here. Awesome. We're clear.
All
Thank
right.
you very much.
Thank you so much. I hope to see you all in a couple weeks.
Sounds good. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you so much.
Appreciate
It
it.
was great to meet you.
Appreciate it.
Bye.
Thank you for being so involved.
Absolutely. Good luck in your new position.
Thank you.
Yep. Take
Bye.
care.